Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am back for my LPL Round 1 overview and analysis. Both of the Round 1 series concluded as of, well, just a couple of hours ago, so it is time for us to jump into the recap. What happened in both of these series, who was good, who was bad, what teams won, what teams' seasons are over. There's a lot to talk about. This is the first playoff review video that we'll be putting out of the season, and of course, as you guys know, because these playoffs are so jam-packed for all these regions, these are going to be coming out multiple times per week, so I hope you guys are excited for that. If you are, let me know down in the comment section below. It really does. Let me know that you guys are enjoying the content. Let me know how you guys felt about a lot of these series today, but I don't want to waste too much of your time. Let's go ahead and get right into the video. We're going to be doing this actually a little bit different than maybe we had in previous weeks. Usually with the weekly recap, I'll just go over the series as a whole, talk about what it means for their implications, but with playoffs being a little more do or die, we are going to be going over game by game for both of the series here in round 1. So we're going to be kicking it off here with the 8-9 matchup here between OMG and FPX, and game 1 was a doozy here. Obviously, you guys can notice a little bit of an upgrade to the graphics. Let me know how you guys feel about that down in the comments as well, but a little bit of a doozy here in game 1. FPX really took it from the beginning. It really wasn't all that close in terms of macro pressure, and I think a lot of that, in my opinion, has to do with this draft. I think the draft is just a little bit cocky in terms of the overall package for OMG. Of course, I've always talked about OMG being good off of the back of their ability to play their comfort picks at a higher level than anybody else can counter those comfort picks, and I think that's great, right? You have the Rumble in the top lane, you have the Tristana in the bot lane. The thing about both of those picks is they really need to win, especially the Rumble in this matchup, but you know, that Tristana as well. Going into Zeri, you're going to get outscaled pretty hard, especially with the Braum protecting her. You got the Lissandra to stop things there. So definitely think that you needed kind of a little bit of a counter punch here, and I just don't see that in draft. On the flip side of all of that, I actually really do like FPX's draft. I think it does a lot of what they want to do, which is just play fast and win early, and I think they did that. You have a few counter punches, a few counter picks, whatever you want to, you know, call them here. You have the Lissandra into the Ahri that really stops Cream from being able to completely take over the mid game here, because Kerr is just going to be able to follow him around wherever he goes, and he's going to be able to at least be kind of the target man to stop him. And then you have your bot lane here, the Zeri. If you can get LWX ahead, he's just going to win the game here. They don't really have anybody else that's going to be good at stopping the Zeri. The Nautilus is never going to be able to get on her, especially with the Braum on top of her. And then even the Trundle slows, I really think are less effective than people give them credit for. Rumble, obviously, is only going to get at most like one tick of the ult. So, yeah, if this Zeri gets online, it's pretty much game over in draft. And that's basically what happened. LWX was just able to get so far ahead on the Zeri that it was basically unwinnable for OMG because they don't really have somebody to stop it. Aki did his best. He tried to make plays around the map, but Clid did a really good job of making sure that not only was not able to do something later in the game, but that the early game pressure was condensed into at least moments where they could fight in even numbers. So they were never really at a disadvantage. LWX went the entire game really without being hit. Hang did a great job of that. And this was really the performance you wanted to see coming out of FPX in game 1. I was really concerned about this bot lane for most of the regular season. Obviously, I had hyped them up so much, but as I said in my playoff primer video, they just weren't as good as I thought they would be. But they gave him the Zeri, they gave him the Braum here. This is one of the better games this bot lane has played in a while, and it absolutely worked out for them. And then you move on to game 2. Little bit of a different game as you get OMG coming back. A really nice counter punch from them here in game 2. I like this draft significantly more. Obviously, the Renekton in the top lane is funny. Renekton just comes back into meta, and now every single top laner is picking him. But I think overall, this just gives you more options. Not only do you have places to go early game, because Amumu can make plays, not only in lane with the Aphelios, but out of lane with the Ahri, or with the Renekton even. Like, you have a lot of opportunities to do things around the map. And then late game, you should be covered. Wukong engages and Amumu engages into an Aphelios backline. Should be able to do a lot. Cream and Shanji are great at being able to peel on these champions. I like this draft a lot better. That's not to say FPX's is bad, but overall, I just think OMG did a really good job. Less comfort, more meta, but I think as a cohesive unit, it works just a tad bit more, in my opinion, and they were able to steamroll this game. They were able to get a pretty early lead here, and even though the game went kind of long and it got kind of close, I think a lot of that was mostly Summit and LWX hanging on for dear life during the back half of this game, but overall, just not a great series, or not a great game from FPX, I think, playstyle-wise. Summit definitely had moments where he was really good here, but completely threw it away. Like, OMG had a huge lead at 15 minutes. FPX does such a great job of clawing back most of that gold going onto the Gnar. And then, man, some just really weird plays where Summit just completely runs it down, throws the lead. OMG gives basically gives OMG the game. And that's unfortunate to watch because there could have been a moment where, back-to-back games here where Summit was really good. Player of the game in both, maybe. I didn't give him that for the first game, but the broadcast did. I gave Cold my player of the game in this one, but I don't know. Summit had the opportunity to be the GOAT here, and he unfortunately couldn't pull the trigger, so definitely unfortunate on that. LWX and Hang definitely took a step back in this one as well. Sivir was significantly out of position for a majority of this game, I think being a little bit too overconfident about her ability to duel with the Aphelios, but man, Renekton and Wukong are absolutely going to punish you if you step up, and then you don't really have anybody to dive onto the Aphelios in the backline. Like, you hopefully have Jarvan, but Jarvan's not going to be able to get there, at least cleanly, by getting through everybody else. So there's really not a lot of ways to get onto the Aphelios, especially if they're playing well, and Abel was able to play it well. Cold played it super well here on the Amumu, and those team fights definitely went the way of OMG, even if it got a little dicey at points. But moving on to game 3, we're tied 1-1. We move on to that third game here, and OMG picks up a very crucial game 3 win. They put themselves in a position where they only have to win one more game to take the series, all off the back of Super Comfort. This is like the Super Comfort draft. Not only does Cream get his Ahri, not only does Shanji get his Rumble, but Abel gets his Samira, the classic Samira that I think Abel has been, pretty consistently banned out of for most of the year. He gets put on it here, and he does super well. Him and Shanji completely take over this game off of a draft that I love. Not only is this comfort, but they do synergize, right? Like, you have a ridiculous team fight wombo if you can get it with Samira ult, Rumble ult, Nautilus knocking people up, making it very difficult for them to get out of the fight. You could absolutely burst down anybody on that team, including the Alistar or the Aatrox, if you got the right combo off, and I think that is super deadly. All they had to do was not screw it up, not get too far behind in the early game, because that's where I would start to get a little bit worried with how this comp would play, but you do have the Xin Zhao, you do have the Nautilus to help contain things in the early game, and I think that absolutely worked out for OMG. In this case, they played really well. Shanji is my player of the game here, although very, very notable second here for Abel. You could give it to either. I thought both played really well here. Abel was maybe a little bit less proactive on the map than Shanji. He had a really good game, made less mistakes, so Shanji gets it here, but Abel also played a much more risky champion here with the Samira, who kind of has to go all in to do a lot of her damage. And you're doing that into someone like a Lissandra, someone like a Sivir. These two picks can actually deal with the Samira rather well, I think, especially towards the latter half of the game. And Abel's just so much better on that champion than anybody is at playing against that champion that he was able to dominate. He was able to do really well. Overall, a really, really, really solid Game 3 win. This is the OMG that everybody wanted to see. The one that wasn't afraid to go to the things that they knew they were good at. The ones that knew they could just pick their Rumbles, pick their Ahris, pick their Samiras especially, and just be able to steamroll. So this is good to see. But can they close it out? In Game 4, they cannot. Game 4 comes up, and FPX does take the 2-2. We're going to a Silver Scrapes Game 5 here, off of the back of Kare's Yone. A phenomenal game from Kare. Kare had kind of been up and down over the past few games. He really hadn't been phenomenal, and that was really the course of his whole season, in my opinion, where there had been moments where Kare and Klid were really on the same page, and, Kare was playing really well, but a lot of moments where it just felt like he was relatively irrelevant in the game. But he had been on Lissandra duty for the first 3 games of the series. Not a lot of proactiveness that you can do in there. Your job in that is mostly just to say, is just to pick one person on the enemy team and make sure that they don't get to play the team fight. But he gets put on a significantly more proactive Yone pick here. FPX does a much better job at banning out the major threats to their comp. Not only do they ban the Rumble, they ban the Sylas, they ban the Samira, they ban the Akali. All of the comfort picks that OMG had been showing that they wanted to play, or at least the main ones, were gone here. Basically, force them onto something else, And it absolutely worked here. Care was completely able to take over the Yone here. What a build, by the way. Want to shout that out. Really cool build. I really hate that it works, but the items are so broken that it's just kind of funny. He played it really well, though. Was able to get a huge lead in the early game. Even though Aki was also able to do quite a bit in this game, and then was able to translate that. Those Yone team fights, I mean, he can absolutely 1v9 if he gets the chance to, and that's what was shown here. Care had a really good game, one of his best of the split, even if the rest of the team wasn't always there. I thought Summit's engages on the Kennen were sometimes not great. Klid definitely got out jungled by Aki in this game. I don't even think it was all that close. And then LWX and Hang were fine, but again, Lucian Nami into Aphelios Nautilus, you gotta win hard or else they're just gonna outscale you. They're very lucky that Care had so much gold on the Yone here that he was able to kind of take over the game, because there was a real chance that if he was just kind of normally ahead, that this OMG team actually scales significantly harder, and they have a lot of trouble fighting them in team fights. But looking at OMG, Aki did such a great job early in the game to gain control on the Wukong and to get, quite frankly, a ton of gold. He was completely loaded, even more so, I think, than Care for a majority of this game. But then he pulled a Summit, and he completely ran it down towards the second half of this game, threw the lead away, was making really weird plays, basically died right before Soul for, like, a random jungle buff. Really, like, I don't understand it. Not a good play, not a good macro play at all from Aki, and, you know, because he was the reason they were in the game, he's not going to get, like, the dud of the game or anything, but he was also probably the reason they lost it, because all the gold was on him and he just wasn't able to perform later in the game. But yeah, big shout out to Care. He was awesome on the Yone. And that kind of brings us into our Game 5, our Silver Scrapes Game 5. I called this in my playoff predictions. I figured the series would go to 5 games. I think these two teams are very evenly matched in terms of talent. So who's going to take the Game 5? It is FPX. They are able to pick up the Game 5 win and win the series 3-2, a very fun series. And again, Care is your superstar MVP here. A great game from him on the Akali, is able to take away Cream's signature pick and then just beat him on it. And that is disrespectful. This was probably the least close game of the series. This was the most blowout, like, basically from moment one. FPX was just the better team. The Akali got super rolling. LWX and Hang were winning in the bot lane. Klid did a great job of enabling every lane, and then Summit was just in the top lane, making sure that the Kennen wasn't going to be able to do much. A great game overall from FPX. They were definitively, in my opinion, the better team in this game, and it wasn't all that close. Like I said, OMG got figured out in draft once the Rumble, the Sylas, the Samira, once all of them were gone. They weren't left with a lot of options for their purpose. And I think FPX did a really good job at taking advantage of that. Big shout out to Care, like I said, but big shout out to Klid. I think he's going to go a little bit underrated for this game. He jungled circles around Aki. Even if he wasn't like the main carry of the game, he definitely gave a lot of resources to Care, and Care was everywhere on the map as well. I thought Klid did such a great job at making sure that the map was entirely in FPX's favor, and that by 10-15 minutes, the game was actually just over, as long as they didn't screw up. He did a great job of that, but yeah, Care was the central carry here on the Akali. Him on Assassins, Care on Assassins, we've seen it multiple times this year in the LPL. They often put him on these more passive picks, and then when he finally gets a chance to be, you know, one of the central carries for FPX, he typically delivers. I will say, overall, if you're looking at the series as a whole, I don't think either of these teams looked entirely complete. I think especially looking at EDG in the next round, they're probably licking their lips at playing FPX with how they played in some of their losses here, especially, you know, games 2 and 3 were just not all that good. A lot of big mistakes here, especially from ahead. Summit did a really good job to come back in game 2, but he completely threw it away, and that's something that, quite frankly, he's done with regularity over the course of the season. So I wouldn't be too confident in that ability, but overall, FPX is going to be happy. They picked up a win. This is exactly as how, basically exactly how I predicted it. I thought these two teams would be very evenly matched, but FPX would be able to take it in 5. That's what I said in my playoff primer, and that absolutely came true. Big shout out to Care. In my opinion, he is easily player of the series here. Was really dominant in those final 2 games that were incredibly important for FPX to win. Obviously down 2-1. Care starts taking over on Assassins, and they come back and win the series. But shout out to LWX, who I think also had a pretty good series. Maybe not a perfect one, but a pretty good one. Definitely had some games where he was a little more meh, but for the most part, I thought he was very good here. And FPX is definitely going to be happy and feel deserved to move on to the second round. As for OMG, this is a tough loss. This is a tough end to your season. you probably really felt like you had a good chance to beat FPX in this matchup, but I just think you were a little bit too predictable in draft. Once you got found out, once FPX realized, oh, if we ban the Rumble, the Sylas, and the Samira, like, they're done. I think that was kind of GG for OMG, because really at that point, they just didn't have the skill to keep up with these players. A player like Aki is just not going to be able to keep up with Clid. A player like Shanji is just not going to be able to keep up with Summit. A player like Abel is just not going to be able to keep up with LWX unless they're on picks that they know they're better on. And unfortunately, in games 4 and 5, they just weren't allowed to be on those picks. Really, really good drafting by FPX, but OMG's, flaws got exploited, and unfortunately, that means the end of their season. Hopefully, FPX can do something in the next round. I don't exactly have a lot of high hopes for that, but their matchup against EDG we can preview towards the end here. Let's just celebrate their win in this series while we have it. That means we can move on now to the second round 1 matchup, our 7-10 matchup between LNG Esports and Bilibili Gaming. And game 1 was certainly a game. I actually think it was closer than maybe the score would indicate here, but LNG does come away with the win here, and they look pretty good doing it. It wasn't exactly the most clean early game of all time, but by the time mid-game hit, their comp was just so deadly in terms of pick potential that they were going to get gold somewhere on the map and then just snowball it completely out of control, and that's exactly what happened. I love the Nocturne mid pick. Somewhere Vedius is screaming into a chair because this is... I love this. I love this. I think this is such a phenomenal evolution of what the meta is right now, and I'm shocked, like genuinely shocked we don't see this more. I know Nocturne is a little bit weak of a champion right now, but his ability to just go into a lane, get a kill, and then come back mid and catch the wave is super duper good, and there aren't a lot of mid laners that can actively match that. Look at the mid laners that are really good in the meta. I actually think Nocturne does rather well into a pick like Taliyah. The blindness is actually pretty huge. It means Taliyah can't ult, at least safely, while it's up at least. And then you also have, picks like Ahri, picks like Akali, like other assassins, LeBlanc even, that are really difficult to go into Nocturne. I think he has so much global pressure, so much ability to impact the game at pretty much any time in a similar way to what a lot of these other mid lane roam champions are doing, that I'm really surprised we don't see him more. And it really paid off here. I'm not going to say it was the central focus as to why they won this game, because you got to give credit to Tarzan, who really, really dominated here on the Wukong, was able to be pretty much everywhere on the map that he needed to be, kind of in the role that he should be filling all year long. Obviously, Tarzan had been struggling for a considerable amount of the season, but he had a really good final week of the season, really punched it into overdrive here, and he's really carried over that momentum into this game and into this playoff series in general, where he looked really, really solid in this game 1 on the Wukong. Dominated Weiwei in that matchup. It really wasn't all that close. Tarzan is my player of the game, although Doinb is a close second here. Remember that Doinb icon was my key matchup of the series here, so we'll have to continue to watch that to see how that goes. But Tarzan looking really, really solid on the Wukong, getting light ahead. Lumao doing a good job to peel for the rest. Ollie wasn't all that needed in this game, but, he was fine for the most part. Really didn't have a lot to do in the game, but overall, this bot side, like this mid jungle duo, I should say, just won so hard that they were able to translate that win to pretty much anywhere on the map. As for BLG, not a great game here. I think you kind of just lost in draft. You, of course, have that Draven pick that you want to get snowballing out of control. But once you get to the point where your jungle is losing super hard, and you have a Nocturne and a Wukong that can come bot and just get at the Aphelios kills, like the game is over at that point, and that's what we saw at about 8 or 9 minutes. The game was just over for BLG. There was no way they were going to run through this because all of their damage is on a pick that really needs to snowball to win, and they weren't able to do that. The Thresh pick in the bottom lane did not work out for Crisp. Obviously, I know Crisp is a great Thresh, and, Thresh is a pick that I think a lot of people want to go to, but overall, he's been nerfed into the ground, and there's a reason that even though he has probably the most useful kit in the entire game, he hasn't been used pretty much at all by any team in any region this year, and that's because, quite frankly, he's just been nerfed into oblivion, and we saw that in this game. There was really not a lot that the Thresh was actively doing to help your game. I really don't like Thresh into Aphelios. Most of the time you see that counter picked away because Thresh Aphelios is kind of the duo lane, but man, Thresh is just so not good right now that he really couldn't help Draven at all. It was just Lantern. He was basically just Lantern in this game, which is never fun. But overall, a really good win for LNG and a really good way to kick off the series. Then you move in to game 2 here, which is another LNG win. They take the 2-0 series lead here, and they've got to be really happy about that. Another dominant jungle performance from Tarzan here. This time, instead of it being on the Wukong, it's on the Poppy. A pick, they're a little bit different, but for the most part, they both play a similar aggressive style. Both want to kind of take over these lanes, and Tarzan does a great job of facilitating that. He's going to get my Game 2 player of the game as well. If you're noticing a trend, he was really good in this series overall, but that also translates, I think, to the rest of this LNG team. Doenb goes to the Corki here. This is a pick we're going to see him go to a couple times in the series. I'm definitely lower on Corki as a pick in the meta right now, but it can work if you're going into something like a Taliyah and you just want to go for full aggression. And they absolutely did. They looked at this BLG draft and they said, Nyla Amumu in the bottom lane, that is exploitable. And it absolutely is. They are absolutely right about that. And so they picked this comp where Poppy can go bot, Corki can go bot, and you pick Lucian Nami to completely pressure that lane out. All of a sudden, Doggo and Crisp are essentially irrelevant in this game, and it is basically a 3v8, and that's not good. That's not good for the side of BLG. LNG executed on it basically perfectly, and Ale won in the top lane split-pushing matchup here. You take the Fiora into the Jax, obviously very much a skill matchup there, I think, for both sides, and Ale does come away with the win. Obviously, game state is significantly more in Ale's favor, and he does make some plays with the team, but overall, a good game from him as well. But Tarzan has to get player of the game here, and you got to give some credit to Light and Lumao, who really did do exactly what they needed to do. Nyla, overall, I think in pretty much every region has proven that she's really not that strong of a pick. She's basically, in my opinion, a weaker Samira right now. You pair that with an Amumu, that is a super feast or famine bot lane, not just because of the Amumu, but Nyla's pretty feast or famine as well. And if you can just exploit that by picking something that just straight up beats them early, they're never going to get to the point in the game where they're going to be doing the damage that's necessary for them to take over the game. So, very good draft here by LNG, a very bad draft here by BLG. I just simply do not get the idea of pairing up a Nyla Amumu in the bottom lane, especially going into Lucian Nami. I think that is such a giga-bad call, and a game-losing call, quite frankly. I think you can win this game, but you put yourself in such a hole, because if Lucian Nami wins that lane, which they should, all of a sudden your bot lane's useless, because if they're behind, they're not good champions, so don't love that. Icon was completely outroamed in this game by Doenb. The Corki obviously does have good map pressure, but it's not always applicable, right? Like, he's able to move around, but he also wants to be the one that maintains his wave state. He wants to be the one that gets online. Doenb plays it a little bit differently here. Teams up a lot with Tarzan to impact that bottom lane to make sure that Doggo gets behind. Does it really well here, and unfortunately Icon falls behind because of that. And then Weiwei, again, here on the Trundle, gets out jungled. This time against the Poppy. He's not having a good series. He really hasn't had that good of a year. I'm not saying he's been like a huge negative issue for BLG, but he just really doesn't add a lot to this team. He's been hyper disappointing, especially with how he's played in previous years. This is easily the worst season he's had in a while, and it's showing here in the playoffs where it just wasn't a very good game. But overall, a great win for LNG. They go up 2-0. That puts them in a prime position to not only win the series, but they have a chance to sweep it here in Game 3. So moving on to Game 3, do they do it? They do not. BLG actually takes Game 3 and pushes this to at least a Game 4 here. Mostly off the back of Bin. And if this is not your stereotypical BLG game from the summer split, I don't know what is. So many times I have said on this channel that it's like, oh, Weiwei didn't really do much in the jungle. Icon kind of went even in the mid lane. Doggo and Crisp aren't really doing a whole lot. But Bin is on this late game, hyper-scaling split pusher that can also fight. And then he just takes over and he creates so much pressure on the map that BLG is basically forced to win the game. That's what happened here. Congrats to Bin. He's easily player of the game. A phenomenal game for him on the Jax, creating a lot around the map, really dominating that matchup against Ale, which can be relatively tough early, but once you get to the point in the game where you have gold on Jax, that Kennen has to be so afraid of you because you can basically kill him in like 4 autos, and that's what we saw. Even if Ale did have a little bit of the lead early in the game, Bin did a great job of translating that like into late. He was able to extend his gold lead, able to teleport in for, objectives if they really needed him, and just create a lot of pressure on the map, become a huge nuisance for LNG to have to deal with. Want to give a lot of credit to Crisp as well. Bin and Crisp have easily been the two best players on these teams, or on BLG, I should say. all year long, and Crisp had a very good game here on the Renata. Maybe not perfect. Obviously, LNG runs it back here with the Lucian Nami. I much prefer the Aphelios Renata lane as an answer to that, because very much as long as you go even, which you can, Aphelios does have very good range in the early game, people forget that, you're going to scale. Like, you're going to be fine. Renata is such a huge hindrance to go into, and even for something like the Wukong Nocturne, which they do bring out here again in Game 3, this is a significantly better comp to actively deal with that. You have the Xin Zhao that's actively able to keep up with the Wukong, and then you have the Akali, who, if you leave Akali and let her get gold, you know, if you start roaming a ton on that Nocturne, oops, all of a sudden the Akali is going to be able to take over these team fights. So Doinb has to be significantly more cognizant of how he plays the map, instead of going into something like a Talia, where basically he's just doing her job, but he's doing it better because they're winning. Where if Doinb roams too much here, Icon could actually just win the game on the Akali. So very much I like this draft a lot more from BLG. A lot of smart responses, a lot of smart answers here, something they really haven't shown a lot in this series, but they played it well. Like I said, Bin and Crisp, definitely the two standouts, but I thought Doggo played his best game of the series here by far. Even if Weiwei wasn't perfect here on the Xin Zhao, I think just the pressure of something like a Xin Zhao, having that trading pressure in the early game, created so much more space for BLG to play, especially in the bottom lane. And then you just get to the point where it's like, oh, Aphelios, Jax, Akali, we have Renata ults. Like, even with Xin Zhao here, like, we're doing so much damage here in the late game that it almost doesn't matter, and they're just able to take those late game fights. So definitely a much better draft here, and I think that BLG executed on it really, really well. A draft that I think favors their best players here in Bin and Crisp, especially Bin. Really like him on these split lane, you know, hyper carries, things like the Jax, things like the Fiora. I want to see him on that more. That is how BLG has shown to be able to win games. He really did abuse Ale in this one, and it's a good win. As for LNG, not the best game. Like I said, definitely a rough draft choice here. Really, your biggest thing that you can, you know, hang your hat on here if you're trying to win with this draft is you got to get the Lucian Nami ahead, and a lot of that just has to be Doinb basically sacking his game to do it. You need to bring Tarzan, you need to bring Doinb down bottom lane, you need to get this Lucian online so that he can start fighting in the late game, but if Lucian's not super far ahead of this Aphelios, he's just not really going to be able to compete in damage. And also, Lucian into Akali is just generally not good for Lucian, because Akali's, you know, the problem with Lucian isn't his damage, it's his range. And Akali is pretty much always going to be in range of Lucian if he's trying to do something. As long as Icon plays that right, Lucian can't really step up in these team fights. It makes it much more difficult. You're relying on the Kennen at that point, but then you're letting Bin take over in a side lane. Like, there's so many problems here that I think BLG exploited, but LNG just didn't play it all that well. It's good to see them get a little bit of pushback here after two really, really solid games to start off the series, but definitely not the most confident showing of all time, but also definitely one where I'm not, like, hitting the panic button on LNG. Really, you know, sometimes you just lose in draft and then you can't play it out. Like, it happens. It's a best of 5 for a reason. You can always bounce back in Game 4, so did they bounce back in Game 4 here? Yes, they did. LNG is able to take the series 3-1 in 4 games here. Another one of my correct predictions here with LNG winning it in 4 for my playoff primer. But yeah, a really, really good series, I think, overall from LNG. And this game kind of encapsulates it. BLG definitely tries to go to some of the things that worked for them. They go to the Aphelios for that scaling. They go to the Poppy, which I think Weiwei has been definitely better on, at least in terms of, like, his other champions all year long. And then you have Bin on a split lane, you know, a side lane like split pusher that can really do a lot of damage in the Fiora. Unfortunately, the mid gap was just a little bit too big, and this goes back to the key matchup I talked about. If Icon can't keep up with Doinb here, it's just not going to work out. And they go for a really interesting comp in Game 4. One that typically I wouldn't like, but I think with the team's playstyle, I think it works out. You have the Corki for late game damage, and you really want to lean into him, but so many plays were made towards the bottom side in the early game. You were able to get a little bit of a lead. You know, BLG was fighting back a little bit. Icon had gold. Doggo also had gold in these trades. Weiwei was doing a good job of keeping the map in, you know, in safe state. And then Ale joins the fight, and you have a 5v4 here. Bin in a side lane. Ale is able to completely take over the fight, gives Doinb all the opportunity he needs to blow people up with those rockets. Even if Corki isn't doing as much damage as he did last split, he still hurts a lot, and Doinb is able to completely destroy these late game team fights with help, of course, from Ale, from Tarzan on the front line. Lumao did a great job in these fights as well. LNG taking the game, and really this was it. For BLG, like, definitely an unfortunate loss, but you can put this at least a little bit on them. Icon made some really bad plays on the Azir here. I don't love the Azir pick in general, especially into Corki. I get that you want this scaling, idea for your comp here. Not only do you have the Aphelios Azir to try and team fight if you do get into a 4v5, but nobody on the enemy team should be able to match Fiora in a 1v1 sense in a side lane. I get the idea of it, but if the Azir gets behind or if he misplays, if he dies early, you have a 0% chance of winning those team fights, and that's what happened here. Icon basically threw the game away with some really bad positioning mistakes, some fail shuffles on the Azir. He just was not prepared for this pick on this day, and that's really unfortunate to say. He had a decent early game, but like I said, couldn't translate that and just got completely outplayed by Doenby here, who was able to take over the game on the Corki. Doenby is my player of the game, by the way. He was doing so much damage. I think you could realistically give it to Ale as well, who, was kind of the difference maker in a lot of those endgame team fights, but for the most part, he was kind of irrelevant towards the beginning half of this game, so I'm not going to credit him too much. I thought Doenby was kind of the central focus of what this comp wanted to do, and he executed on it. Outlook-wise for this, for BLG, it's a tough end to your season. Not the way you wanted your season to go, but, as a super team that was at one point, even lucky to make playoffs, I think they're going to be okay with this. I think they're in full rebuild mode next year. I don't expect to see a lot of these players back. Bin was really your only major contributor, and Crisp, I think, was kind of a little bit on that level as well at points, but, Bin was really the one that I think you want to invest in. Obviously, you acquire him midseason from the MSI champion RNG team, and, he isn't quite the same player for this team. Obviously, I don't think he had the talent around him to be able to unlock himself, but still, he was on my all-pro teams for a reason. I really do think that he was the heart and soul of BLG, and I would expect them to keep him, but everybody else on this team I think is fair game, and it's unfortunate that this is the way their season ends, but I can't say that it wasn't, a little bit predictable here. And then for LNG, it really feels like this team has gotten some of their mojo back. When it comes to week 10 in the LPL, moving on to the first round of the playoffs here, they look significantly better than they had looked for a majority of the season, mostly because a lot of the season was predicated on Light playing really well. I talked about that in my playoff primer. Light was the guy for LNG for a majority of the year, and if you notice, I didn't really talk about him all that much in this series. Not that he played bad, but this team kind of went back to the roots of what I think it was founded on, what everybody thought this team was going to be when they got together, which is this mid-jungle duo being able to completely abuse and take over the map. They did such a great job of it in this game. Tarzan is going to be my player of the series here for LNG in the jungle. He played really well, not only in games 1 and 2, but he completely took over the map in game 4 as well. Even in game 3, where they were losing, he wasn't all that bad. Overall, this is exactly what you wanted to see. This is Tarzan stepping up, Doenby stepping up. The two players I think I was most concerned about in my playoff primer really came to play in this series and were kind of the carries. If they can maintain that form, they're going to be a team that surprises a lot of people, and my prediction in my playoff primer of them being able to beat Weibo in the next round looks pretty good in hindsight. Well, that's going to do it for my round 1 recap. We covered both series here, the FPX OMG one that went to 5 games, and LNG BLG going to 4. Both of them were fun, especially OMG FPX, even if the quality of the gameplay was a little up and down, I think, in that series, but that means we can now prep for our round 2 games. FPX beating OMG means that they now have to take on EDG, the reigning world champions, and LNG beating up on BLG means they get a little bit of a rematch in from week 10, the final week of the season, where they get to play Weibo Gaming. If you want my full thoughts on these matchups, go ahead and check out the playoff primer video that I released earlier this week. I predicted that both of these series would go the way that they did, and so I've already talked about these matchups a bit, but for a little bit of a short overview, EDG FPX should be incredibly EDG favored. Really, the only chance I can see FPX having a shot in this series is if LWX goes absolutely nuts in the bottom lane. I really don't see anybody else on this team really being able to compete, at least even just micro-wise, with anybody on the other team. Maybe with the exception of Clid into Junjia, but Junjia has unlocked so much for EDG in the recent weeks that it really feels like this bot lane is just unbeatable. The mid lane Scout has been playing a lot better recently, and when Kair's not on Assassins, if you do ban that out, I think he's a significantly weaker player, so this should be in favor of EDG. They are the significantly better team, and I would expect them to take it in 3 or 4. And then for Weibo versus LNG, I I actually went with the upset in my playoff primer, and I'm sticking to it. I think LNG is going to win that series. I think Weibo does not have a particularly favorable matchup into LNG, because what are Weibo's weaknesses? Well, it's the mid-jungle duo, who just absolutely smurfed against BLG in the first round. The mid-jungle duo, and when they're on, when they're at their best, when Tarzan and Dombey are working, they are super duper good. Maybe not the best in the league, but still very, very strong. I think that's a matchup that LNG absolutely could take advantage of. You're really expecting someone like the Shy or Huanfeng to overextend, and if Doinby and Tarzan are playing like they did, maybe they do pick the Nocturne. Maybe they do pick things like the Wukong and the Poppy. They are going to be very much able to punish and abuse those overextensions that Weibo often likes to make. I like LNG just as a matchup in the series. Even if I don't see them as the more talented team, I would expect them to be able to come away with this win. But like I said in my playoff video, Weibo is one of those teams where it's so up and down with how they play. The difference between their best games and their worst games is the largest of almost any team in the world. So they very much could just show up and we could get the best version of the Shy and the best version of Huanfeng and On in the bottom lane, and it could not even be close in favor of Weibo. Really, it's just about which Weibo shows up on that day, but if I had to predict, at least matchup analysis-wise, I would go with LNG in 4. Although this very much could be LNG in 3, could be LNG in 5, it could be Weibo in 3. Honestly, all of the possibilities are open for this series, but for me, I think matchup-wise, I'm going to stick it with LNG. But yeah, that is going to do it for my Round 1 LPL playoff review. If you guys enjoyed, please go ahead and leave a like. It really does let me know that you are enjoying the content, and I really do hope you enjoy the content. Let me know how you guys felt about these playoff series in the comment section below. Who do you think is going to be winning here in Round 2? We've definitely got some interesting matchups, and I'd love to hear you guys' opinions on it. So, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.